Good afternoon to everyone. We are so excited to have you here at another segment of our Hearing Impactful Voices Town Hall. Today's Town Hall is going to cover facts and Vaccs, and that's a citizen forum to address questions, concerns with the bioethics of the vaccination. Today we have as our partners Alabama SEAL, UAB School of Medicine, and of course, STL Foundation. Again, we're happy to have you here. Please check the chat box for any information, and we will have a Q&A session. During that session, please put your questions in the Q&A box. That's the only way that they will be answered, and we will let you know when that segment starts. So with that, I now turn it over to Dr. Hannon, our host for today. Thank you. Only way that they will be answered, and we will let you know when that segment starts. So with that, I now turn it over to Dr. Hannon, our host for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Frazier, and thank you for all that you have done to help make this production possible today. We welcome everyone to the newest edition,
and we will let you know when that segment starts. So with that,
Engaged Empowerment, Hearing Impactful Voices Town Hall. Thank you, Ms. Frazier. And so thank you for all that you have done. I certainly want to make this production possible today. Help everyone understand that today our goal is to empower residents, and we want to do that by distributing high quality information to everyone watching today. And so it is my pleasure to be here. It is my privilege to be among such distinguished people. So before I make any important decision, as a scientist, I always go back to my faith and I ask God to order my steps. And so today, before we start with the town hall, I want to introduce Jay Little, who is going to bring us in with a rendition of Order My Steps.
Humbly I ask thee, teach me your will while you are working. Help me be still, though Satan is busy, God is real. Order my steps, please order my steps. Bridle my tongue, let my words edify. Let the words of my mouth be acceptable in thy sight. Take charge my steps. I'll praise your name. Order my steps in your word. Order my tongue in your word. Guide my feet in your word. Wash my heart in your word. Show me how to walk in your word. Show me how to talk in your word. When I need a brand new song to sing, show me how to let your praises ring in your word. In your word. Please order my steps in your word. Please order my steps in your word, oh God. Please order my steps in your word. Please order my steps in your word. Please order my steps in your word. Please order my steps in your word.
All right. And that's how we do it. So before we make any important decision, we want to make sure that it aligns with our faith. But we also want to make sure that we have the scientific knowledge that helps to make that decision, help us make that decision. And so we certainly want to thank our pianist and our wonderful singer today. I also want to take this time to acknowledge our community partner honor roll. I want to say thank you first and foremost to the National Southern Christian Foundation. This is our community partner, and they have been for several years now. I want to thank the UAB Community Health Innovation Awards, Dr. Allen, who has done such a wonderful job with that over the last few years. The UAB Community Engagement Alliance Against COVID Disparities. And thank Dr. Mona Fawad for her leadership. The UAB Comet and RADX program with Dr. Faith Fletcher and Dr. Mugavera and Dr. Max Michaels. I want to give a special thanks to Tiffany Whitlow with Acclinate, who has been working behind the scenes to make this production go and make it work. I also want to thank the Tuskegee RCMI under the leadership of Dr. Clayton Yates. And finally, our Community Action Agency of South Alabama under the leadership of Jennifer King. All right. Thank you all for all the work that you have done in our communities, helping to educate our residents, helping to empower our residents, and bringing about the changes necessary to have a more equitable and just society. All right, today we have two very distinguished panelists who will be joining us. And it is my privilege today to be here in person with my mentor and colleague, Dr. Stephen Sadeke, who is a world-renowned bioethicist. It is also our privilege to have Dr. Selwyn Vickers, who is the Dean of the UAB Medical School, join us today. Dr. Vickers is a well-established, world-renowned scientist and physician, and under his leadership, the School of Medicine has achieved unknown heights in its growth and in its direction to be a leader in the field of medicine. And so I want to thank you both for joining us today. And it is certainly a privilege to be here. So with no further ado, I would like to use this time here to have each person, each one of our panelists, introduce themselves and say a few things about them. And so let's start with Dr. Vickers.
Thank you, Dr. Hannon. It's a great pleasure for me to be here, and I appreciate the partnerships and the partners that you've outlined, particularly the National Southern Christian Leadership Foundation and their organizing support for this. I'm Selwyn Vickers, as you mentioned. I'm the Dean of the School of Medicine. Although I've spent a number of my years outside of the state of Alabama, I am a native Alabamian, born in the Black Belt, but obviously have a passion for both our state, our people, and wanting to see us do good for all our citizens of our country by both the example and the leadership we demonstrate in our state, in our School of Medicine, and in our efforts to care for the people of this state. So I'm excited to participate. I enjoy and have had a number of years of working with Dr. Sadeke, and he is a good friend and a great partner in many things that we do. So I'm looking forward to sharing this panel with him.
All right, thank you so much. All right, Dr. Sadeke.
Thank you, Dr. Hannon, and welcome, Dr. Vickers. I feel the need to preface my introduction with a confession that I'm here today by grace. Grace, yes, grace, that wonderful and infinite grace of the Almighty God, sufficient for all our needs. I give glory to God and honor to the planners of this town hall that presents an opportunity for us to listen, to hear, to look, and to learn for the benefit of each one of us and for the common good. I'm Dr. Stephen Shodeke. I serve as the resident bioethicist at the Center for Biomedical Research at Tuskegee University. I am also professor of bioethics within the College of Arts and Science, Department of Modern Languages, Communication, and Philosophy. It is my privilege to serve as the chair of the Institutional Review Board for Tuskegee University. It is with excitement and thanksgiving to God that I say hello to everyone out there and thank you for this great organization of these citizen conversations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sadeke and Dr. Vickers. And also thank you for agreeing to serve on a panel today. We are going to be transparent and we are serving a real important purpose today where we are helping to translate scientific discovery that's associated with the COVID vaccine. And so I just want to start off by asking each one of you, so what are some of the pros and some of the cons of taking the COVID-19 vaccine? And let's start with Dr. Sadeke or Dr. Vickers.
Dr. Vickers.
Yes, sir.
You know, Dr. Hannon, I think the first step, as you've outlined and you and Dr. Sadeke have done, for our people, many of the major transitions for us when we face significant threats to our existence or our next step in life have been steps of faith. And that has stood us well as a people. And I would employ us to not forget that, as you've outlined both in your faith, and I would share the same, that's an important reasoning point to actually take advantage of opportunities when there's a lot to say, stay where you are, and yet there's an opportunity to move to a next step. And I would position this in the context of the COVID-19 virus. The pros, I would say, first of all, is the fact that it's what we know versus, which is often the biggest con of what we don't know. So most of our cons in relation to this virus and this vaccine are what we don't know. We don't know the 2-year long-term effects of the coronavirus vaccine. We don't know in broad numbers of whether we would need an additional dose of the vaccine. We certainly are frustrated by the fact that we have to take 2 doses of the vaccine. But I think what we do know is that to record today, 110 million people have been infected. Over 2 million people have died. Now, those things we can't forget to get lost in what we don't know. We do know that as it relates to our people, we are more likely to get infected. We're almost 3 times more likely to be put in the hospital, and we're twice as likely to die. Those factors are what we can't forget in this decision-making process versus what we don't know. What we know is that this can be dangerous for everybody, but particularly lethal for people of color for multiple reasons. The other thing is that in relationship to this virus and to this vaccine, when we use the term novel coronavirus, that had a lot of implications. Number one, we hadn't seen it in the context of the human body, even though we've had some coronaviruses around. And if it's new as a disease, a priori, we're going to potentially have a hard time having something to stop it. And that has proven to be the case. We haven't had a lot of drugs that actually have been targeted. The drugs we have not been anywhere near what we've been used to for efficacy. When we've taken a drug before, it's controlled the problem. Well, in this case, the drugs haven't stopped the infections and it hadn't saved enough lives. They are getting better, and there are some drugs related particularly to the antibody that have made a difference, as well as remdesivir has as well, and steroids at the right time. But when the vaccine came out, knowing that the baseline for getting it to be promoted to be acceptance was 50%, and these vaccines have been north of 70%, and the first 2 were greater than 90%, we have nothing like that in our armamentarium to fight this pandemic. And so the other real con is what we have now is really powerful and can truly potentially make a difference and prevent future loss of life.
Thank you so much. Dr. Shadeke?
Thank you, Dr. Vickers. You are spot on in those elements that you enumerated. I just have 1 or 2 things to add here. As a matter of pro, what we do know is that no one wants to die before it is their time. Therefore, if we have any way of trying to prevent that and to work towards it, then maybe we should. What can be considered a con is that we now are short of vaccines. And so now we are worried as to who is going to get it, where are they going to get it? Vaccine hunters crossing states and running all over the place, you know. It ought not to be like that. But here we are, and we need to move forward from there. To do nothing will be grossly unethical.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shadeke. We appreciate that information and helping us really understand how the pros and cons are balanced in making this decision. And I believe that whenever we as humans make really important decisions, that's what we do. We balance the pros and the cons. So I appreciate your transparency and your candidacy, being candid with this and allowing us to really have the best information possible. So I also want to talk a little bit about what are some ethical boundaries to marketing and distributing the virus vaccine in terms of, how far should we persuade people to take the vaccine? Are there ethical boundaries to our marketing of the vaccine to people?
Thank you, Dr. Hannah. You have raised a good but complicated question. In bioethics, we are drawn to say complicated questions deserve complicated answers. So bear with me for a minute as I attempt to answer the question that you have posed. I want to appeal to theological ethics and philosophical ethics as I try to answer the question. But the theological ethics is based on scripture. And as a starting point, we must begin with something we have in common. So the first guidance is to believe that all of us are masterpieces created in Christ Jesus to do good works which God Himself has prepared for us to do before we even knew it. So we are created beings, created in the likeness of God, dignified and deserving all respect anyone can give. A second guidance is to remember the humanity in all of us. That German philosopher Immanuel Kant of another age once suggested the categorical imperative that rational human beings, which we all are, should be treated as an end in themselves and never as a means to something else. This is to say that the fact that we are humans have value in and of itself. We exist, so we have value. It will be morally impermissible. It will be morally impermissible and wrong if someone treats another merely as means. A third ethical guidance is to remember the maxim of universal law of nature. Kant suggested that we are to act only in accordance with that maxim, through which you can at the same time will that it becomes a universal law. Any such action is morally permissible. A fourth ethical guidance is the imperative from Scripture to act with compassion and love. So what is the application of these theological and philosophical standpoints? The marketing and distribution plans for the vaccine are means to ensure vaccination widely. And public health officials tell us that the idea of using vaccination to protect us from further spread of the virus and prevent continual suffering and deaths only works if everyone gets vaccinated. It is anyone's guess, though, whether that will ever happen or not. But if we act in love towards one another, we would have done our part for the common good to prevent COVID spread, to reduce cases, and to prevent the increasing deaths from COVID. We must find the courage to act correctly. TV commercials, legal mandates, workplace mandates are other creative messaging and ways of preventing the virus from spreading. Are they perfect? No. Should we worry about the wrong use of any of these media? Yes. But concentrating so much on the means without focusing on the complicated existential needs of the end, which is you and me, would be difficult to morally justify. We must listen with compassion to the concerns and fears about the side effects of these vaccines. We must tell our own story to make an impact. We must explore reasons for the hesitancy that is in our communities. We must choose to counter misinformation. We must tailor the messages that we send accordingly. We must encourage vaccination for the common good and provide access information, but acknowledge the right to choose not to take the vaccination.
Wow, that was really powerful. And one of the things that stood out was this ideal of the common good. And with the COVID-19 virus being an infectious disease, it really helps us to think about how we interact with our fellow man and woman. And so the point that you brought about love is so important. You know, taking the vaccine could be an act of love, and that we display towards our fellow man and woman. And so that's very powerful. I would like to give Dr. Vickers an opportunity to respond.
That was a great.
What are some ethical boundaries for how we market the vaccine?
Dr. Sadecki's response was really phenomenal. I think it hits home to some basic principles of broader thought about beyond my personal interest, about the greater common good. And I think we've seen the similar dynamics about wearing a mask, right? It's why do I have to if I have a personal right not to? But should I wear it because I have a personal responsibility to my brother or sister? And the vaccination is an even more powerful, compelling piece of this fight against this virus, with the same dynamics of, yes, do I have a principle of making, to some, the sacrifice of getting a vaccine because it helps me? But even if I don't, do I have the love to do it because it helps those around me? And then I think the fundamental piece he mentioned, if I'm going to practice that sort of ethical approach, I can't apply it to just what seems that's in line with my thinking. I have to be willing to apply in the cases when people disagree with my thinking. And so that people have the choice not to take it. And I have to respect that, even in the case of the common good. And in this scenario, because it is a vaccine that's been deployed under emergency use authorization, and that is, it's not cut any corners. It's gone through all the clearances a normal vaccine or drug would do. The only thing we didn't do is to have 2 years of data around safety and long-term effects to get the full FDA approval. I don't think any ethical person would say, with the performance and the ability of protection we've seen in this vaccine, that we would let the American public go without getting vaccinated to wait 2 years to figure out if anything else would go wrong with it. And so that is the only reason short why it can't, in our country, from legal means versus ethical, be mandated.
So thank you so much. And that helps bring about the question of, so what are some of the most dangerous myths surrounding the virus that you have heard? And that's for either one.
Okay. My list is very short. There seems to be this notion that the use of the vaccine is a genocidal plot within the African American community. That is a very serious charge, but that's part of the myths that's going on out there. Another one is the fact that we don't know whether it works or not. And the next one is, I don't even think I need it. So certain people think they don't need it because they've survived this far. So why do they need the vaccine? And if they think they do, then why is it that they have to trust it to work and work as well without messing up inside of them? Those are the short list that I have. Dr. Vickers may have a longer list.
You know,
Dr. Vickers?
I would preface this, and I think Dr. Sadeke is spot on about some of these myths. I would preface this by saying the fact that it's discouraging, not that people have concerns about the vaccine, but I am discouraged that people would play on the legitimate distrust in our community because of our past history and create myths that further create harm for us, right? So we have legitimate reasons as a people to have distrust. Being in Tuskegee right now should not be lost on anybody of the history of this country and the delivery of healthcare and treatment of people of color when it comes to disease. And so the principle, though, is that we have to be informed by our past, not limited by it. And when there's opportunity in the present, then we have every right to be careful that we do all of the detailed work to make sure the step we make forward is not a repeat of the past, but the past shouldn't keep us from gaining opportunity that's going to do good for us and potentially for all. So the myths that are out there, I agree that it's a cyber plot to put some type of bug in our system so they can monitor us and they can keep watch on us in a very unique and clandestine way. Number two, the vaccine that Black people will get will be what's left over, which will be a half dose and which will be used and not any good. Number three, this vaccine will keep young women from being fertile, and it will cause pregnant women to lose their children. The fact of the matter is, part of this is just started because there is a spike protein on the placenta called Sentin-1 that is a spike protein, but it is totally different than the spike protein on the coronavirus. And so people have conflated that the antibodies will work against that placenta protein. There's no evidence to that to be the case. In the Pfizer study, 23 women got pregnant while getting the vaccine. One woman lost her child. The woman who lost her child got the placebo, not the vaccine. So we don't have massive numbers to say we got 1,000 pregnant women who all got it and nothing went wrong. What we do know, if you're pregnant and get infected, you have a high risk of dying and losing your child. So people, again, play on us without telling us what we do know, but basically play on us about what we don't know. The reality is, again, if you're pregnant and get infected, it is not a good thing. And we've seen no bad thing from a pregnant woman who took the vaccine. Now, we'd like larger numbers. That holds true in the Pfizer study. 2,000 Black people got placebo, 2,000 Black people got the vaccine. Of that 2,000 people who got the placebo, 6 of them got infected, and many of that 6 had to go to the hospital. Of the 2,000 Black people who got the vaccine, 0 got infected. Now, I would have loved for that to be 15,000, 10,000, bigger numbers. But the numbers we have said that this vaccine was 100% protective in our people. Now, that obviously number won't hold if you do 20 or 30,000. I suspect somebody, because it's 94%, 95% effective, it's not perfect. But the data for us, what we know, really dispels most of the myths that are out there. And the final ones I'll say is that if I've gotten infected, Dr. Sadeke said the same thing, I don't need to get the vaccine. We clearly do not know how long your natural immunity lasts. We do know that after 3 months, people have gotten reinfected, which means that the immunity probably doesn't last that long as we'd like if it's just because you've gotten an infection. And the other one is, I don't need to wear a mask if I get infected. The reality is, even though you might be protected from yourself getting an infection, you still might carry the virus in your nostrils or even in your mouth, and potentially are able to spread it to others who've not gotten vaccinated.
Right. Thank you so much. At this time, I would like to open the floor for questions from the audience. Are there any questions from our Facebook or Zoom audience?
Okay, Dr. Hannon, we have one question. It is, I am a 55-year-old working class African-American or Black woman, whichever you prefer. Some of us are not willing to get the vaccine because of past experiences, but many are willing. When will the middle-aged working class be able to get the vaccine? We're the ones keeping the economy going, as well as having our entire lives ahead of us. This age group should have been on the priority list.
Yeah, I would say that there's no doubt that the order and the staging is imperfect. And we would love to make sure that potentially anybody, certainly those over 50, many who have some other illnesses also, or have carry some other illness, that could get access to the vaccine more immediately. So what I would say to the when is, without having any crystal ball, my hope is in, March, April, that almost anybody who would like a vaccine, particularly that age group, will have had access to get there, because we would have had supplies at a level that will open up the next phase of vaccine dosing. So reality, probably end of March, early April is my best yet. At worst, it's probably May, June, but my hope it's before then. And particularly if in fact you obviously fit into any of these essential worker categories, that would be even earlier.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Vickers. The next question is, can you point to any public health campaigns that have successfully addressed the vaccine hesitancy?
I think Dr. Sadeke and I both can answer. I can't tell you that I know. I would say the success of getting vaccines to communities of minority or rural areas, independent of people's color and background, is based on prior relationships with their trusted voices. And those trusted voices, whether they're their faith leaders, whether they're physicians, or whether it's the health organization that they interact with. UAB has probably, has certainly done better nationally, and probably better than most even regionally. Over 20% of our doses of vaccines have gone to people of color. And it's really been driven by the fact that we did the work of trust and engagement before the coronavirus came a problem. We did relationships of building those relationships in the communities of color. Dr. Fuad's center and other leaders built those relationships over time so that the lift of getting people to trust us as providers, that work was done before the crisis hit. In the process of the crisis, it's faith leaders, it's trusted voices that they believe in from the healthcare and from the community that I think create the most effective process of really reducing the hesitancy of taking the vaccine.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, can you please stress the point that there is no virus in the vaccine, in particular, the mRNA vaccines?
Dr. Siddiqui may have had a comment on the last question.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that you are spot on how you responded, but I wanted to remind us that by the framing of the question, say, can you point at a public health campaign?
Dr. Siddiqui, I hate to interrupt you, but we cannot hear you. Can you please take your mask off again?
Okay,
So
thank you.
Participants can understand you.
All right, is it better now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I said Dr. Vickers was spot on as he addressed that particular problem. I just wanted to add the fact that the idea that there will be one campaign out there that will address vaccine hesitancy, it's difficult to understand because vaccine hesitancy is a wicked problem. And a wicked problem is a problem that does not have a single answer. That there are so many different ways in which we can address this hesitancy. And I think Dr. Vickers alluded to some of those. So we got a problem where we need various ways, including engaging the community and the trusted individuals within the community to help out in educating, persuading, if you will, and again, just doing the law of relationship in there. Every little bit that we direct against this particular wicked problem is going to help.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Siddiqui.
Thank you, Dr. Siddiqui.
Ms. Frazier?
Yes. Yes. Can you
So
hear me?
So the question that was on the table was virus and the mRNA vaccine. So the historical way that you got your vaccines, particularly if it's mumps or measles, is that we took those viruses and killed them. We use the term attenuated. And so what we gave you in those vaccines that many and most Americans have had is a dead virus that couldn't infect you, but it would give your body a chance to actually look at its outer coating and make antibodies against it to defend you from getting infected from it. Now that worked. Some of the vaccines in other countries like China have used that same technology. But I've been asked by many, why hasn't healthcare and medical science advanced that we could cure this overnight? Well, the advancements that did occur did allow us to get a vaccine to the public in record time, not because of cheating or shortcutting. It's because of next generation molecular biology. That one, it didn't take 6 months to 3 years to identify the virus. It didn't take a year and a half to sequence the virus. That's the times it took for us to get HIV sequenced and identified. But we've advanced now. We advanced to that the virus was sequenced within a week of it being detected. And within a week of it being sequenced, we made a vaccine to it because we knew from previous coronavirus infections of different types what part of the virus caused the problem. So we didn't have to give you the whole virus. You're given the part of the virus that is a blueprint of a part of the virus that creates the problem. So the blueprint is the mRNA that then is packaged in essentially a small fat cell. And that small fat cell is able to fuse with your muscle cells and uses and takes advantage of the muscle machinery to make that spike protein, and eventually it stops and decays. But it makes enough of the spike protein for your immune system to see it and get memory to understand what the coronavirus looks like, particularly the part of the virus that creates the infectivity. But no virus in it. If you've taken a mumps vaccine, you've taken a virus in a vaccine, and it worked. In this one, you don't have to have it. It's actually more sophisticated. It's only giving you the part of the virus that creates the problem, not the whole thing, which in many parts you don't need to develop an immune reaction to.
Okay, Dr. Vickers, we do have a question from Facebook, and this is from a person who has blood clot history. How does the vaccine affect your blood, or have studies been done on people with a history of blood clots?
Yeah, I don't know that I can tell you there have been specific questions to answer it. I will tell you that people with blood clotting disorders were not excluded from the vaccine trial. What we do know, again, is coronavirus can cause significant clot problems if you get infected. So there is not any evidence that getting the vaccine will promote clotting or prevent clotting. And it shouldn't by virtue of the way it works. But again, what we do know is that if you get infected and you have a clotting problem, that can be very bad.
Okay, another question is, how can you address the second dose and the side effects that occurred for many people, and how taking Tylenol or Motrin helped with some of the mild or severe side effects of the vaccine?
Yeah, I would say that Tylenol probably preferred. You want some inflammatory response to the vaccine in the second dose. It's variable of who gets really ill or feels sick from it versus those who don't. Those who do get it, it's some aches and chills like they have the flu, and it lasts typically no more than 24 hours. And Tylenol for many people makes a big difference.
Okay. The next question is, is there any data on vaccine hesitancy being a bigger problem in Tuskegee compared to other Black communities in Alabama?
Well, I'll offer that opportunity to Dr. Hannon and Dr. Sadeke if they know of anything.
Can you hear me? No? Okay.
Take your mask off.
Yes. The hesitancy that was there when the vaccine rollout came up was quite high. Want to put a number on it, that would be way back December. But from some of the things that I've been reading, particularly some news that's coming out of Tuskegee, does say that there's a significant decrease in the hesitancy now, as we see many of our great leaders within the community, as well as our health professionals as well, and all of those people that are frontline workers rolling up their sleeves. And people are beginning to, and telling their stories. People are beginning to feel that maybe it's not so or too bad after all. So it was high, but my sense is that it's now coming down.
Right, and just to echo what Dr. Sadeke was saying, we are seeing a higher rate of people who are willing to take the vaccine. Hesitancy is declining. So it was never the case where Black people uniformly didn't want to take the vaccine. There are a lot of Black people who do want to take the vaccine in Birmingham and in Tuskegee. And so, but there are people who are reluctant, and they are reluctant, and they are taking more of a wait and see approach to this. So wait and see is not necessarily opposed. And so the more and more people are able to see others take the vaccine, the more confidence they are having. And over time, I think that the hesitancy will decline to perhaps a negligible rate. But I do think it's important that we take into consideration the concerns that people have and some of the well-founded fears that they have based on the historical mistrust that has built up over the years. Thank you.
Oh,
Ms. Frazier?
yes. The next question is, should patients receive a COVID test prior to the vaccination?
Not necessarily. I think in general, that's not a requirement, particularly if you've not known that you've had an infection. There's an expectation, as in the case of the vaccine trials, but certainly in these studies, that there will be a small but significant group of people who will get the vaccine who've already been infected. And this has not seemed to create a problem. So no, I don't think anybody is requiring anyone to test to see if they've had the virus and have been exposed to it before they get the vaccine. What we do know is that studies now are showing that for every diagnosed case, there are probably 5 cases that have not been diagnosed in our community. And as it relates to people of color, that number is often 10 to 12 cases that haven't been diagnosed compared to every 1 case that has been. So invariably, some people who will get the vaccine will have had the coronavirus infection, and it should not be a deterrent.
Okay, the next question is, I live in a rural community. Currently, only the county health department is administering the COVID-19 vaccine 1 day a week. When will there be more accessible sites for residents to get their vaccine?
You know, that's a crystal ball effect. I think that's a question everybody would want to know. And there are efforts now trying to get more vaccines to rural communities and making sure there's greater access, even if it means having high volume sites that people will go to. In short, when we get more vaccine delivered to the states, that's when more vaccine will be accessible to every aspect of our state, but particularly our rural communities. And when that will occur, probably again, not till April, May, and maybe late March, the volumes and production may have picked up by that time.
Okay, all right, we have people are being asked to sign up online. Are there walk-up centers for those who are not able to sign up online, or other ways to get access to the vaccine?
So there are efforts to put in the ability for people to begin to just call. We realized, Dr. Fuad's team, and with this SEAL grant, realized that there are a number of people who simply don't feel comfortable, have access to use an online sign-up mechanism. And so there will be ongoing efforts for people to make calls, potentially opportunities, hopefully, for mobile vaccination units. But yes, there is an evolution to create multiple ways to sign up other than just the online version, which has been the way we could get the greatest number of individuals vaccinated and get appointments.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, do we know of any data suggesting the currently approved vaccines help defend against the variants?
We do. We know that the data looks fairly impressive, that both Moderna and Pfizer, the two-shot vaccines, both appear to be effective against the UK variant. The Johnson & Johnson also appears to be effective against the UK variant. The Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine also seem to still to be effective currently, because those variants can continually modify, effective against the South African and Brazilian variant. The Johnson & Johnson has still some protection, but it is not as effective as the Moderna and the Pfizer against the South African variant, but it has some protection.
Okay, and this next question, you may have answered it in some parts, but I will give it to you just in case. It says, how have you addressed issues of equality among groups who have historically been neglected in this country, i.e. older Alabama residents versus essential workers versus teachers versus Black and brown groups? All of these subpopulations are disproportionately exposed to COVID-19, but not all of these groups have equal access to the vaccine. So how do you make decisions related to distribution, and how do you communicate these decisions to the public?
That sounds like a question for Dr. Hannon.
Well, so Ms. Frazier, in that question, what I hear is a transition from vaccine hesitancy to equity in access to the vaccine. And to be honest with you, when we first started discussing the vaccine, I was more concerned about whether groups such as Black people or traditionally marginalized groups, I was more concerned whether they would get equal access to the vaccine. And so the question is, what are some of the barriers that exist to marginalized groups getting access to the vaccine? And they are the same barriers that exist to marginalized groups achieving access to any resource in our country. Education, income, place, and when I say place, I mean neighborhood and housing. And so those are the most stringent barriers that we see in achieving or accessing any type of resource that leads to well-being. And from my research and from my readings, I see that those are going to be the primary barriers to receiving the vaccine as well. For example, like someone talked earlier about having broadband internet access and how most registration sites do require that. Well, automatically that is a barrier that is really composed of just place and income. And so it goes back to our traditional social determinants of health that serve as either assets or barriers. They're either liabilities or assets to life in general, but also to the vaccine.
You know, I agree. I was going to say that I think we are, you know, many of the issues regarding our disparities and social determinants of health that affected us, as well as the access issues we have around our vulnerable populations, were smoldering embers in our country. And this pandemic has turned those smoldering embers into really massively burning flames. And so we've seen the compound effect. The unfortunate thing is that if you have limited power and limited access during the normal weather conditions, that tends not to improve when a tornado hits your house. It's tend to exacerbate it. And that's a bit where we are, is that we had problems before the crisis, and in the midst of the crisis, our fight is to make sure it doesn't worsen. But that is the risk we face. I think someone has mentioned too that we shouldn't characterize the hesitancy that we have in our community as legitimate refusal. It's reasonable hesitancy to question, and we should. Most of our people, compared to others, are not in healthcare. So our insight into it is not any different than any person else who's not in the healthcare arena, where there should be reasonable hesitancy. But we shouldn't allow that hesitancy to be positioned as refusal, which can often come back to say, well, don't send any vaccines there because they don't want to take it anyway.
Okay. This next question is a question for clarification. The question is, there are 2 vaccines that are approved for persons 16 and older or 18 and older. Is that correct? The vaccines are just for people 16 and older or 18 and older?
That is correct. The studies are being done now in kids, both by Pfizer and Moderna, to answer the question about children and their ability to take the vaccine.
Okay. The next question is, can you get the flu vaccine and the COVID vaccine, and would you need a booster for either?
You're not recommended to get them at the same time. You can separate them by several days or months, and typically 2 to 3 months between the two, but at least several weeks before you get between them. What we do know is that the number of cases of flu and typical flu-like illnesses are massively down. And that's not because those viruses are afraid of the coronavirus. That's because we've worn masks and the spread has been drastically limited. So you can get them both, but they should be separated by several weeks so that you don't create sort of a competing effect in your immune system.
Okay, our next question is, should people that have been infected with COVID take both doses of the vaccine or just one dose? And thank you all for the great presentation.
Both. Simple. To get the full effect and the long-term effect, you need to take both.
Okay. The next question is, how was it decided on the priority in vaccine location sites?
I think that, the State Department of Public Health had an advisory team that advised where they should send vaccines across the state, which were in limited supply, obviously not enough for everybody. They chose some sites that were initially all healthcare providers, hospitals, who had relationships with communities and had an ability to staff and support delivery of the vaccines to their community because of the resources that they had in place. There was not enough vaccine to give to every doctor. I think there are potentially over 250 practices that would want to get the vaccine, but there's just not enough to share it with everybody. So no matter where it was sent, there were guidelines by the CDC of who could get it, right? So in this early phase, I could have put a lot of vaccines in vulnerable communities, but the guidelines necessarily may or may not have allowed the people in those communities to take advantage of it based on the priorities that were set by the CDC for giving the vaccine out.
Okay, thank you. The next question is a great discussion. Availability of the vaccine is a concern for communities of color. What is UAB and Tuskegee doing to help disseminate the vaccine to the underserved communities? Additionally, there are social issues associated with getting the vaccine, such as location of distribution sites, internet access, transportation, etc. And I think you may have answered part of that question earlier, but if you want to address it again. Did anyone want to address that again, or do you want me to move on to the next question?
So go ahead, Dr. Sadeki, I'll follow you.
What I do know is that there are at least 2 places where one can get vaccinated here at Tuskegee. Just last week, I was trying to get a sense of what's going on in terms of access and how people are making efforts to present themselves and do this, and it seems to be improving day by day. That's all I know about it.
I would say that as it relates to UAB, we've stood up a vaccine site in one of our traditional underrepresented minority communities at Parker High School. We ourselves at Highlands is in the city of Birmingham as well, which has a significant minority population. So 2 out of our 3 sites are in areas where a good number of African Americans have access. We obviously would like to be more distributed in some distinctive areas beyond what we have, but there's the balance of having the vaccines in every small shop to having them in high volume areas where people can, yes, inconveniently have to be transported. Somebody has to get them there, but you can be assured that the resources and the people will be there to make sure the vaccine numbers can be delivered. And so we've had sites in places, and our data reflects it. 21% of our deliveries have been people of color. In fact, maybe 25% if you include African Americans and Latinos.
Right, and I'm glad Dr. Vickers mentioned Parker High School and the historic Smithfield community in Birmingham. Smithfield is a Black community, predominantly Black community, and Parker High School serves as an epicenter for a lot of different positive events that goes on in that community. As far as Tuskegee University, the university has sent out a link for faculty and staff to get vaccinated. It's an opportunity for us in East Alabama Hospital, and they are also working on sites that are a little bit closer as well. And so just thinking about that, just if I could jump in for just 1 second, Ms. Frazier, what is the federal government's role in helping to advance the rollout of the vaccinations? So I was talking with my mom and dad, and they both talked about the polio vaccination efforts. And they talked about how they were vaccinated at school, how a lot of the institutions were really involved in this, but it was really a government response to a very big problem. So I just posed this question to you both. What should the federal government's response be to accelerating the vaccine rollout?
Well, we are all shooting at a moving target in the sense that things are changing on a regular and daily basis. I think the federal government is trying, as we say, the number of vaccines that will be needing to be rolled out will have been increased. We still have a lot to do with, getting it to the places where they need to be. And I think the federal government has a role to play in that, in securing all these other extra places. I hear about FEMA. They have commanded FEMA to build these FEMA tents all over the place. And so we're not there, but we can see that we are making progress.
Yeah, I think the polio example is a good one to think about, of where there was a mass need to vaccinate almost everybody. I think some of the urgency was there, but probably not at the same level that we're seeing here in the crisis because of the infectious rate and the ability for transmission of this virus. So we've had a bit of rapidity, a need for rapidity of our delivery and our plans because of how lethal this has been and how fast it spreads. I think the most important responsibility for the federal government is to be a source of truth when it comes to information and when it comes to how we're actually going to approach fighting it. I think this is a scenario where a decentralized, hands-off approach and just turn it over to the states is one of those occasions where that doesn't work because the states don't have the ability to create revenue. And that's the federal government that has that power. And so in a time when you need immediate resources, the federal government is fundamental to not only providing the resources, but has often the strategic resource of human power and strategy to design for us the most accurate and the most reasonable way to get vaccines across to every part of the American landscape. This is an area when you leave it to the states alone, it's going to be highly variable. And that's how you see vaccine tourism. You know, people coming from Georgia, coming to Alabama, people from Louisiana going to Mississippi, all over, because there is not a structured plan that completely embraces that. So I think that the federal government is working now with what it had in place prior to the change in leadership, but I think dually trying to create a more functional and more efficacious and effective model of delivering the vaccine out to everybody.
All right, thank you. Ms. Frazier, I think we have time for 3 more questions from the community.
Okay, I'm going to combine these 2 questions. The first one is, the question is, after taking both doses of the vaccine, how long will I be protected from getting the virus? And then when will you launch mobile vaccine units?
So it takes about 2 weeks after each of these doses to get full protection. So there have been people who've gotten their first dose of vaccine and within 5 days go and get connected with someone who is infectious and they have become infected. So it doesn't mean the vaccine doesn't work. It simply means that you can't not stop having safe behavior even after you get vaccinated. But in practice, it takes about 2 weeks after your dose to get that effect. We believe that the effect will at least last 8 months to a year. That's our best estimation. We don't know yet because nobody's had it for a year. So some questions being asked, we don't have answers to because we don't know yet. We just haven't been that far in history yet. So there is a chance that there may need to be an annual booster, but we don't know the answer yet.
Okay, our next question is, in addition to the vaccine being unavailable to some communities, there is also a concern among rare disease patients and their caregivers. What are your thoughts on the availability of the vaccine for patients and their caregivers affected by rare diseases? And how can we as a community stakeholder and nonprofit organizations lead and or support these efforts?
So I think if the so-called rare disease in some way makes you more vulnerable or makes your response less robust to a coronavirus infection because you have a worsened chance of survival, absolutely, those individuals I would love to see moved up as quick as possible on the delivery scale to get protected. The issue at hand is a large part of those concerns are resolved if we have enough vaccine doses. They become an issue that goes away because we can get vaccines to those specific individuals. The next phase, obviously, is for those who are over 65 and who have some level of comorbid or previous illness, which in some ways fits what she or he's describing in that question. So I think in some places, those individuals are getting it now, but I think soon after, in early March or middle of March, there will be an opportunity for those individuals to hopefully fit into one of the priority categories to get vaccinated.
Okay, and then the question, will the vaccine be free for everyone, whether you have insurance or not?
Absolutely, it is free.
Okay, and the final, Dr. Hannon, do you have time for 2 more questions or just one?
Yeah, we have time for a few more questions. Let's say 3 more questions.
Okay, the next question is, can you tell us all if Bill Gates was involved in vaccine development?
You know, I can't speak to the involvement to all the vaccine candidates that he wasn't, right? So I think at one time there are 120 vaccine candidates out there. I don't think he was directly involved with either Moderna or Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson, because the federal government gave more money than, these companies could ever have asked for. There was hundreds of millions of dollars put on the table for them to make vaccines, more money than Bill Gates had. And so they didn't need his money for most of these vaccines that have come off, because the government had billions put in place in order to assure that vaccines would get done. He certainly could have been involved in other companies, and he may have been involved in the planning of global distribution to vaccines to countries and areas where there are clearly disparities and people that are underserved across the world. But I don't think he was involved in the 3 that we're now rolling out.
Okay.
Certainly not in the design.
Okay, there was a question about sickle cell, in people that suffer from sickle cell, and since it is a prominent disease among African Americans, was any kind of special attention given to individuals with sickle cell and the vaccine?
They weren't excluded from the trial. It's no special attention, but if you had it, you could get the vaccine. And there is no evidence from what we know that the vaccine creates any undue harm for them if they get it. Again, what we do know, if you have sickle cell, you don't want to get infected.
Okay, so we have not a question, Dr. Hannon, but a comment. And I believe that's the last question that we have.
All right.
And the comment is, well, let me read the comment. And
yes,
then that's the last one we have. It says, all persons falling within 1B critical workers at highest risk are eligible to get the vaccine now, such as grocery store clerks, workers in poultry factories, those in other manufacturing industries, food and agriculture, and more. Go to covidvaccine.gov and click on COVID-19 vaccine allocation plan. This opens the door for many people of color, regardless of their age. Remember, currently approved 16 years or older. And I will place this in the chat box for our attendees to be able to see. And at this time, I don't see any other questions.
Well, at this time, I want to thank Dr. Stephen Shadeke and Dr. Selwyn Vickers for taking the time out today and answering all of the questions from the people in the community. See, when I do these town halls, my primary goal is to make sure that residents are empowered by understanding the latest scientific discovery, So what we're doing is we're translating all of the wonderful things that we know in the science world to be applicable to citizens and to residents across the country. And so, I mean, I deeply appreciate both of you coming and speaking frankly and being candid and accepting and fielding so many questions today, because at the end of the day, this is for the people. And I really appreciate it. And at this time, I want to bring on Glenn Parsons and Jay Little, and they are going to have another song and they are going to help close us out.
If you want to snap, you can. It's all right, it's okay. Don't you let your troubles get in the way. Just believe and have faith. Know that He is with you every day. It's all right, it's okay. Don't you let your troubles get in the way. Just believe and have faith. Know that He is with you every day. Sometimes it's hard to say you're doing okay when you're trying to hide the pain on your face. Times are getting harder. You prayed and you prayed. Just keep hoping, believing, hold on your faith. It's all right. Are you snapping? It's okay. Don't you let your troubles get in the way. Just believe and have faith. Know that He is with you every day. There are times when you can't seem to find your way. The skies are dark and you can't tell right from wrong. Put a smile on your face. Keep holding on, 'cause brighter days are coming and it won't be long. It's all right, it's okay. Don't you let your troubles get in the way. Just believe and have faith. Know that God is with you every day. It's all right, it's okay. Don't you let your troubles get in the way. Just believe and have faith. Know that He is with you every day.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to turn it over to Ms. Frazier, and she is going to say a few things in closing, and we'll say a few more things in terms of our gratitude for everyone who has made this possible, and we will adjourn from there. Ms. Frazier?
Thank you, Dr. Hannon. I also want to thank Dr. Siddiqui and Dr. Vickers for your very informative and accurate information that you shared with our community. I think it has been very helpful, and we look forward to continuing to work with you to get this information out because our main goal is to save our community and our people in any way that we can. We want to thank you for attending this Hearing Impactful Voices Town Hall. We look forward to you attending future town halls, and if you want any information, you can call our office at 334-226-3063, and we can answer your questions. This has been recorded and it will be placed on our YouTube page and our Facebook page for accessibility. And I do believe UAB will have it posted on their social media outlets as well. Again, thank you so much for attending. We hope that we answered all questions. If you have some questions that did not get answered, please call that number and we'll make sure that we get those questions answered and back out to you on a social media platform. Thank you and good afternoon.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So in conclusion, I want to once again thank Stephen Sadeke and Dr. Selwyn Vickers from UAB, Dr. Stephen Sadeke from Tuskegee. Thank you so much for coming out and answering all of these questions from the people in the community. I want to give a special thanks to Jay Little and to Glenn Parsons, who really blessed us today with terrific musical renditions that really help uplift our spirits. And also it helps us to keep first things first. We always want to do that. I want to thank Daryl Rock, who has been working behind the scenes, who made all of this production happen, him and his team. My wife, Kimberly Hannon, who is here as well. And she is truly my better half, all right? Probably my better 2/3. And so I really do want to say thank you to everybody. And with that, we're going to close. I hope everybody has a beautiful day and continue to learn and continue to, as Dr. Stephen Sadeke said earlier, love your fellow man and woman and understand that, we're dealing with a virus right now. We have a vaccine. We have all of the social distancing protocols that have been put in place for a reason. And that reason really is grounded in our love for our fellow man and woman. Okay, so just think about that and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hannon. Thank you, Ms. Frazier and Dr. Sadeke. My pleasure.
Thank you, Ms. Frazier. Thank you.
Thank you all so very much. Thank you.
Thank you.